Hello and welcome to my most disappointing reads of the year. So this is a not so fun video to film, but I think that it is still a useful one to do because it can help you to set your expectations properly for some of these reads. And also, if a book didn't work for me, it might work for you for exactly the reason that it didn't work for me. So I'm going to take you through my top 10 most disappointing reads of the year. Now, I very specifically dubbed this video my most disappointing reads and not the worst books that I read in 2020, because these aren't bad books, they're just books that didn't work for me for one reason or another, and I'm going to get into why I am doing this in order from 10th most disappointing to most disappointing of the year. My 10th most disappointing was Wicked As You Wish by Rin Chupeco. So this is an Arthurian urban fantasy story, and as you can possibly tell, I received this as an ARC in a Fairy Loot box, I believe, and I didn't really know much about it before I read it. I hadn't heard anything about it. I didn't really have any expectations going into this one, but unfortunately, even though the plot of it sounded really interesting and the magic system sounded really interesting, it was just a little bit too young on the young adult spectrum for me, and not quite far enough to take it into middle grade. So the thing is, I really love middle grade. I love the whimsy and the bravery of the characters and that kind of thing, and I like YA stories, but that kind of middle section that bridges between young adult and middle grade doesn't work for me, and that's where this one kind of fell. And also it ended up being a travelling story, which really isn't my thing at all. So unfortunately, this one disappointed me a little bit. Next up at number 9 was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This was one of the thoughtful book club picks for the year, and this one is a literary fiction story and actually ended up being kind of historical fiction as well, which is part of what didn't work for me, I think, that follows twin sisters who are black but white passing, and they run away from their small southern town, and then their lives just completely diverge and they live in very different ways. One of them uses the colour of her skin to live life as a white woman and all of the privilege that comes along with that, and the other swings in the other direction and marries a very dark-skinned black man and has a very dark-skinned child before returning to her southern town, which is mostly occupied by white passing people, and so she is judged for having chosen to have a child with a dark-skinned black man. So it's a really interesting concept, but I think that the combination of a literary writing style and a historical fiction kind of setting is what made this not work for me. It's not like really historical. I think it's set in like between the 50s and 90s, which isn't particularly historical, but considering I was born in 91, it's still historical enough for me. And I think that more modern historical fiction doesn't seem to work for me quite so well, and I didn't realise that before, as in I didn't realise that this was kind of that kind of period of historical fiction before I read it, and also I didn't realise how literary this was going to be. I prefer a much more straightforward writing style, and this dealt in a lot of metaphor, which again just doesn't really work for me. If you like beautiful writing and if you like books that don't necessarily give you the answers, but just kind of put questions to you and asks you to figure it out for yourself, you'll love it. You really will. But that is just not me as a reader at all. And I was I guess, expecting to be spoon-fed slightly more than I was, and that's why this one was unfortunately a little bit disappointing for me. Then we have The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson coming in at number 8, and this is entirely my fault again because I just did not realise what I was going into. I thought that this was going to be a science fiction adventure with alternative universes, kind of a bit like a Portal fantasy, and that's not what it is. This is a conspiracy thriller mystery with the backdrop of a sci-fi version of our world where travel between parallel universes is possible. That's what this actually is, and I don't really read thrillers, and I'm very specific about the kinds of mystery stories that I like, and that's why I didn't particularly enjoy this one. Also, oddly, some of the twists in here seemed really obvious to me and I figured them out almost immediately, but that wasn't the experience for others in the book club. This was another thoughtful book club pick. Whoops. But others did enjoy it and didn't guess those twists at all. So I don't know what happened there because I'm not normally very good at guessing what the twists are going to be, but I did on this occasion, and that partially played into why this one didn't work so well for me. So unfortunately, this one was also disappointing. Next up, we have a manga. This one is W. Juliet by Emura, and this one was disappointing to me because it had so much potential to deal with gender roles and norms, and I feel like it kind of let that opportunity pass it by. So this is a story about a couple of characters who are in like the drama club at school, and they get cast as Romeo and Juliet. They're both girls, and I'm holding this upside down. There we go. Wow. So Ito is quite an androgynous girl, and so she often gets cast in the male lead roles in this drama club. And then this new student, Tsugumi, is a really, really pretty girl, and she gets cast as Juliet. But it turns out that actually Tsugumi is not a she is a he, or they are a he, and it's not a transgender thing or a gender fluid thing. It is my dad has challenged me to live life as a woman for a year if I want to follow my dreams of being an actor rather than taking on the family business. And I don't know, that just kind of felt insensitive to me. It could have been a story about a trans person and a gender fluid person or a non-binary person, but what it actually was a boy trying to convince the world that he's a girl for his own benefit, and a girl who is trying to prove that she's a girl. And it just didn't pay off for me. It felt slightly offensive to me, and it's probably a product of its time. This is quite old. This was published in 1997, but I don't know, this didn't sit well with me. And even aside from that, I struggled to follow the story of this. It felt quite choppy to me. So yeah, this was really disappointing, and actually this probably should have been higher on this list, but I didn't want to be a negative Nelly, so it's here at number 7. Next up at number 6, we have Fortuna Sworn by K.J. Sutton, and this is a fae romance story, and I had been told that this was quite steamy, and I went into it excited for a little bit of paranormal fantasy romance with some steam. And this is not steamy to me. As someone who has read some very, very smutty paranormal fantasy romance, this was just nowhere on the scale of what I consider steamy, and so it just did not work for me. And it is not a story with lots of plot. There is a challenge in here, like a competition challenge type thing, which I was also excited for, but that kind of fell flat for me because the focus was meant to be on the romance, but the romance just wasn't enough for me. I think that this needed to be longer and build on that romance even more. I'm not saying that the plot needed adding to particularly, but there needed to be more steam for me, and the lack of steam was what made this disappointing, because I like quite a lot of steam in my adult paranormal fantasy romance, or adult romance of any kind. Really, there needs to be lots of steam, otherwise I get bored. Next up, at number 5, we have Mort by Terry Pratchett. And I'm so sad that I didn't love this. I love the personification of death as a character, and this was my first Terry Pratchett, my first Discworld book. I was really excited to get into the Discworld, and this is absurdist fantasy, and I guess I just don't like absurdist fantasy. I didn't find it funny, I found it silly, and it just didn't grab me. And also, I thought we were going to be following Death in this, and we're actually following Death's apprentice, Mort, which I should have gathered from the title of the story, but for some reason I didn't. I'm not ruling out trying other things within Discworld, but this just sadly didn't work for me. I'm really sad about it. Then at number 4 we have Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I had heard so much hype about this one, and that's what got me with it, because it just, for me, did not live up to the hype at all. It's meant to be this kind of satirically dark story, but I just didn't find it amusing. I didn't find it edgy. I found it sort of try hard in that respect. It didn't work for me in that way at all, and I didn't like the characters, and I found the plot boring. So again, I'm really sad because the people who love this really love it, but for me, it just, I think if you like the writing style and you like the character, you will love this. And I think you will know the answer to both of those questions pretty early on. I should have DNF'd this. I didn't, because I was reading it for a reading challenge, and if I hadn't been reading it for that reading challenge, I want to say that I would have DNF'd this, because I knew really early on that this just was not going to work for me. I think that if you like Nevernight by J. Kristoff, which I also didn't like, you would like this, because it's got that very similar dry, sarcastic, satirical kind of writing style. And I like satire, I like sarcasm, I like dry humour, but this wasn't the right kind of any of those things for me. So I'm really sad I couldn't join the huge amount of people who love this one, but it just really didn't work for me. Next up at number 3, another book that I found offensive. We have The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This one is much more my style in terms of sci-fi mysteries. Plot-wise, I enjoyed this one. However, the character work, as I mentioned, I found to be offensive. There is a lot of fat shaming that goes on in here, and the way that the fat character is described as being grotesque and hating themselves and being slow and waddling. It was just very uncomfortable to read and quite upsetting, and I would say massive trigger warnings. If you are triggered by that kind of discussion, then don't read this. It's really upsetting. It's also ageist. There was an elderly character, and the disdain for the elderly character wasn't quite as drastic as for the fat character, but equally it wasn't dealt with in a pleasant way. I won't be picking up anything else by Stuart Turton because I found it triggering for myself as someone who has a kind of difficult relationship with my body. This was just not a pleasant book to read. It's so sad because I really enjoyed the plot and it could have been such a fantastic book, but I was just left with such a sour taste in my mouth because of all of the fat phobia and fat shaming and ageism that was present here. It was unpleasant. Then at number 2, a book that might surprise you, we have The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. This was my second most disappointing book of the year, and it was actually my first read of 2020. And the reason I chose it is because I thought, well, if I start 2020 with a Brandon Sanderson book, I'm bound to love it. And who doesn't want to start the year with a book that they loved? And I didn't love it. Now, I didn't hate it. And the same can be said for a lot of these. I didn't hate really any of them, perhaps with the exception of this one and this one. Most of them were just meh for me, okay? This one was meh. I don't love Wild West type settings. This is very much a gunslinger type story. That is not my jam at all. This one's quite short. It's kind of a bridge book between Mistborn First Era and Mistborn Second Era, so I didn't feel like the character development was up to Sanderson's usual standard. And I think that he says, like, you know, he did this as a trial to see if people would like it, and he was surprised that people liked it because he didn't think it was his best work, and I have to agree with him. This was not my favourite. I've read the rest of Mistborn Era 2. The Wild West type style continues. I don't love that. The other 2 books I did like better than this one, but I still don't love any of them by any means. But this one in particular was disappointing because I read it first in the year because I thought that I would love it, and I really didn't love it. And finally, my most disappointing read of the year was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This one was a very highly anticipated book for me for 2020. I love the original Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. I've read the books multiple times. I've watched the films multiple times. I really, really love the Hunger Games trilogy, and I was excited to go back to the world, go back to an earlier games. When I put this on my anticipated list, I didn't know what it was about. When I found out what it was about, I became nervous. It's quite chunky, and I read it and it was just okay. I don't think it was necessary. I don't think it really added anything. It is an origin story for Coriolanus Snow, which I don't think we needed. We're not actually in the Hunger Games in this, and the Hunger Games doesn't look anything like what we're used to, so I didn't even get that. Really, we were just back in Panem and spending more time with a character that we don't like, and this isn't trying to redeem him, thank goodness, but it's still, I don't really understand why Suzanne Collins did this. I think if she was going to do another book in the world of the Hunger Games, she should have followed another tribute in a different games, and that would have been far more interesting. This, I feel like was unnecessary and I didn't enjoy it at all. So that's it, bit of a downer, but I know that these videos can be really useful. So these were my top 10 most disappointing reads for 2020. If you have read any of these and you really liked them, please let me know why down in the comments. I think that would be really helpful for other people. Hopefully this has helped you to figure out whether one of these might actually work for you, because of one of the reasons I said it didn't work for me. And I think if you enjoyed one of these and can put your reasons why in the comments, that might really help others to find books that they want to read as well. So I hope that you will do that. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.